My daughter stood in her living room on Christmas Eve, looking straight at me, and said, "Dad, just sit by the door and don't embarrass me tonight." The guests laughed, thinking I was just part of the staff. I smiled, but inside my heart broke. A father should never feel like a stranger at his own child's table. What she didn't know was that I had been keeping records. Every forged document, every false word. And tonight, I planned to reveal them all. When the CEO she admired most called me boss, her face turned white as snow. Want to know how it all ends? Follow my story until the last chapter, and don't forget to subscribe and comment the city you're watching from, so I know how far my story has reached. The phone call came the night before Christmas Eve. Marla's voice carried no warmth, just a flat reminder. "Dad, if you want to come, the dinner's at 6. The words landed heavy, like a formality she couldn't escape. Not an embrace, not even a suggestion she hoped I'd be there. More like a courtesy, given out of duty. A father shouldn't feel like a guest at his own daughter's table. I pulled out my best coat anyway, brushing the sleeves with care. Years of winters had worn it soft, the fabric familiar against my hand. The air outside Boston bit at my cheeks as I walked up the shoveled path. Snow piled high along the sidewalks, lights glittering from neighboring houses. Families were gathering, welcoming each other with hugs and laughter. My steps were steady, though inside there was a weight pressing down, one that only grows heavier when you sense you're not truly wanted. The sound of laughter reached me before I even touched the front door. It was loud, alive, spilling through the windows like warm air escaping. No shadow moved toward the entrance, no one waiting for me. I pressed the bell, waited. Nothing. After a long pause, I tried the handle and stepped in quietly. The house smelled of cinnamon and baked ham, pine needles from the tree in the corner. My eyes swept across a living room filled with people, glasses raised, conversations flying over one another. Marla turned at last, her smile polite, measured, barely touching her eyes. "This is my dad," she said flatly, as though stating the obvious to strangers. Heads turned briefly, nods offered without connection. A few faces showed surprise, like they hadn't expected me to exist at all. Then their gazes slid away. I shifted toward the side, standing where the light dimmed just beyond the doorway. The trees sparkled, ornaments glinting, yet no one drew me in. The chatter rolled on, effortless, without pause for me. I raised my voice lightly once, tossing a remark toward a small group, but their laughter veered back to Marla before I finished. My words hung in the air, fading without a reply. The sting settled deep, even here, among family. I was invisible. My eyes caught the reflection of myself in the window, shoulders slightly hunched, face lined by time and labor. A man who had built a life steady enough for his children, who had worked until his hands stiffened, now standing on the edge of his daughter's celebration like a stranger. Dignity was the last shield left. So I straightened, pressed my lips tight. She didn't want a father here. She wanted a placeholder. When at last I looked for my seat, the truth cut deeper than words. The chair reserved for me stood not near the dining table where laughter gathered, but pushed into the hallway, next to a row of coats. My chest tightened as though someone had drawn a line, keeping me outside the circle. I rested a hand on the back of the chair, its cold wooden frame biting my palm, straightening my spine. I refused to let the hurt show. No one would see me falter, but inside, the sharpness of the gesture carved itself into memory. I wondered, as the laughter rang out from the living room, if this Christmas would only carve the distance wider, if tonight would be remembered as the night my own daughter erased me completely, lowering myself into that chair by the coats. The laughter from the living room spilled toward me like waves I couldn't reach. The distance wasn't measured in feet, but in the way joy seemed to stop just short of where I sat. My back stayed straight, pride anchoring me, but the hollowness around me pressed in hard. A father shouldn't sit in exile at his own daughter's Christmas. Yet there I was, more fixture than family. Guests drifted in and out, shaking off the cold, pausing to glance at me with polite, uncertain nods before disappearing into the warmth of the other room. The smell of roasted ham and pine needles carried past, Reminders of the celebration I was not part of. One couple paused near me, speaking in hushed tones. The woman leaned closer to her husband and asked, "Is he helping with the coats?" My ears caught it clearly. Their assumption sat heavy in my chest. My jaw tightened, but I forced my eyes forward, letting the sting sink where no one could see. The humiliation sharpened when Clint Malloy arrived. He strode in, full of cheer, shaking snow from his shoulders. Without hesitation, he shoved his jacket into my hands, as if I were waiting there for him. My fingers clutched the fabric before I even realized it. Time seemed to still. The choice between correcting him and swallowing the insult lingered in the air. Across the room, Marla's eyes flicked toward us. She saw it. She knew. And yet she said nothing. Her silence was louder than a slap. Holding Clint's coat, my thoughts spun faster than my breath. Was this the role she meant for me tonight? Not a father, not a guest, but a shadow in the corner, collecting coats in silence. The weight of years pressed down. I had built a home once, sacrificed sleep and sweat to keep her safe, to keep food on our table, and now, at the very table born from those sacrifices, I was reduced to a man mistaken for staff. The fire in my chest flared, but I stayed still. Dignity was the only armor left. Outrage would only hand them another excuse to dismiss me. When Clint walked away, his voice booming with laughter, Marla slipped her arm through his and introduced him to others. "This is Clint," she said warmly, her smile wide enough for the whole room to see. Not once did her words turn toward me, not even a gesture to acknowledge what had just happened. That silence was more deliberate than any insult. Sitting there, I felt the room tilt, not from wine or age, but from the slow recognition that I was no longer part of her picture. She could erase me in this moment, so cleanly, so easily. My mind whispered a warning. If she could wipe me away here, in front of strangers, what else might she erase? The echo of Clint's careless gesture burned in my chest long after the coat left my hands. And as I sat by the door, the truth pressed heavier than the laughter around me. This Christmas held cruelties I hadn't yet seen. The chair by the door had grown harder with every passing minute. Laughter rippled from the living room, carrying with it the warmth of connection I no longer felt part of. Watching groups form around trays of food and glasses of wine, a knot tightened in my chest. It was Christmas Eve. After all, family should be more than faces passing by. The urge to belong outweighed the sting of rejection, and so I stood, smoothing my jacket as if dignity could be ironed into fabric. Steps toward the center of the room felt heavier than they should, as though each one pulled resistance from the floor itself. The lights glowed soft and golden, reflecting off ornaments dangling from the tall tree. Marla's voice carried over the others, sharp and polished, a tone I remembered from her younger years when she wanted to impress. For a brief moment, I let myself hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd soften, that tonight could shift into something that felt like home. I lingered at the edge of a small group, listening, nodding. One guest, a man holding a crystal glass filled with deep red wine, turned to me and asked casually, "Are you helping out tonight?" He said it lightly, like small talk, but the words carried a blunt edge. The smile I forced tasted bitter. "No," I answered simply, trying to keep my voice calm. The truth inside, that I was not staff, not a stranger, but her father, clawed at my throat. Marla heard. Her eyes flickered to me, then away. No correction offered. No acknowledgement to bind me back into her circle. That small choice of silence weighed more than the careless assumption itself. Heat rose in my chest. For years I'd worked, sacrificed, built something solid, only to stand here mistaken for an outsider in my own daughter's house. Still, I drew in a breath, steadying myself. I would not crumble, not yet. The murmur of conversation carried around me, but I wasn't content to stand mute. When a lull came, I gathered my courage, leaning slightly forward into the group. "This reminds me," I began, voice gentle but steady. "When Marla was a little girl, we had a Christmas—" I didn't finish. Marla's voice rose, sharp and precise, cutting through mine like a blade through cloth. "And that's when Clint closed the deal of the year," she announced, pivoting the group back toward another guest. Laughter spilled instantly, people leaning in, drawn by her energy. My words hung in the air half-born, then dissolved under their cheer. The sound of laughter stabbed harder than the earlier mistake. My throat tightened, but not with anger. It was humiliation, sharp, public, undeniable. She hadn't just dismissed me privately. She'd erased me openly, in front of them all. I pressed a faint smile onto my face, refusing to let them see the crack. But my eyes betrayed what the rest of me worked to hide. I stepped back, the wall cool against my shoulder, as if the plaster itself welcomed me more than the people in that room. Their cheers surrounded Marla now, her face alight with the glow of attention. She had mastered it, the art of silencing me without a single harsh word. Inside, a voice whispered, heavy with realization, if she could erase my words so easily, what else was she willing to erase? My seat, my stories, my place in this family. The thought burned, bitter and raw, as I stood in silence. I realized then that my daughter, the little girl I once carried on my shoulders, had perfected the art of making me disappear. The sting of silence still pressed against my chest as I caught her gaze. Marla's eyes locked onto mine from across the room, sharp and cold as ice. There was no need for words. Her stare said it all. "You don't belong here." The sound of clinking glasses and laughter swirled around us. Yet for me, time slowed under the weight of her look. My back stiffened instinctively, shoulders squaring, as though my body refused to surrender. For years, I had taught her resilience, yet now she wielded it like a blade against me. The room carried on as though nothing had shifted. Guests exchanged stories, passing plates of hors d'oeuvres, while the hum of Christmas carols blended with the chatter. But beneath that layer of merriment, a battle raged quietly. Her eyes pinned me, a silent warning that my presence was already an intrusion. That frozen look dug deeper than any insult could. My pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the ache of betrayal. I refused to lower my head. If she wanted me silent, she would have to fight harder. Across the living room, a group gathered near the Christmas tree, admiring a large ornament hanging proudly in the center. Its polished wood gleamed beneath the lights. A familiar ache stirred in my chest at the sight. I knew every groove of that carving, every line etched with care by my own hands decades ago. I had gifted it to Marla when she was still a girl, a symbol of family strength and endurance, carved during a winter when we had nothing but each other to cling to. Yet as she approached the group, Marla's voice rang out bright and proud. "Isn't it lovely? Clint brought it from a special boutique downtown. Such a thoughtful gift, don't you think?" My stomach tightened. The words landed like a hammer against glass, shattering years of memory. That ornament wasn't Clint's. It wasn't from a store. It was mine. A piece of me now repackaged, erased, reassigned. The sting was unbearable, sharper than her stare. I stepped forward, each movement steady, deliberate. My voice emerged calm but edged with steel. "That ornament," I said, my tone carrying through the chatter, "was carved by my hands one winter, long before Clint was even part of this family." The laughter stilled. A ripple of silence spread through the room. Marla's smile froze, just for an instant before she recovered. "Oh, Dad," she said lightly, her laugh forced. "You must be misremembering. It's easy to confuse things at your age." The dismissal was like salt on an open wound. Her voice was airy, but her words cut deep, brushing me aside as though my truth were just an old man's confusion. Around us, eyes flicked back and forth. Guests caught between politeness and discomfort. The air thickened, every second stretching longer than the last. My chest tightened, but not with shame. It was with resolve. For years, I had chosen silence in moments like these, telling myself dignity meant stepping back. But tonight, standing here with my own history erased, I realized silence was no longer a shield. It was surrender. I straightened, my eyes fixed on hers, steady and unblinking. No raised voice, no trembling, just a firm presence that refused to be brushed away. Her glare met mine, unyielding, cold as stone. The laughter had died. The music felt distant, like an echo in a hollow chamber. Every face in the room turned, waiting for the next move, suspended in a fragile moment where only two voices mattered, hers and mine. The laughter died, and all that remained was her glare and my resolve not to be erased. The silence that followed my correction about the ornament weighed heavier than the air itself. A few guests shifted in their seats, trying to resume a cheerful tone, but their voices faltered against the tension lingering in the room. I could hear the clinking of glasses as someone nervously poured more wine. Laughter strained and forced. Marla didn't argue openly. She didn't need to. Her stare told me everything. There was calculation in her eyes, a promise that the humiliation had only just begun. I sat straighter, unwilling to let the weight of her glare crush me. My heart pounded, steady but strong, like the ticking of a clock marking each second of my exile. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice reminded me, "Stand firm. Lester, you've lived through worse storms than this." Marla broke the silence with an almost theatrical ease. She leaned into the glow of the Christmas tree, her voice smooth, commanding the room as if nothing had happened. "It's been such an incredible year," she began, drawing the attention of the guests. Her tone sparkled with false modesty. "The company couldn't have closed those deals without my guidance. We're expanding into new markets. I guess all the hard work finally pays off." Heads nodded, glasses lifted. Admiration glistened in the eyes of those eager to stay in her favor. I listened, jaw tightening, as she went on to describe her successes, projects I had once nurtured, ideas I had quietly funded, deals she had closed only because I laid the foundation years ago. Every phrase was a theft, not of money, but of legacy. My fists clenched under the table, nails pressing into my palms, each word digging deeper into the wounds she'd already opened tonight. I forced my face into neutrality, swallowing the fire building in my chest. Let her boast. Let her strut before these people. She could take the applause, but she would not take my dignity. As her voice filled the room, my eyes drifted. They landed on the mantel above the fireplace, where a row of framed photographs captured the smiles of holidays past. My breath caught when I noticed one particular picture, a family gathering, years ago. I remembered the day vividly. I had been there, holding Marla's arm, standing proudly at her side. But in this version of the photo, my figure was gone, cropped out, erased as if I had never stood there. The realization hit harder than any insult. This wasn't just about neglecting me tonight. She had been rewriting me out of the family's story for some time. My throat tightened, not with rage alone, but with the ache of betrayal too sharp for words. The conversation around me blurred. Laughter and chatter muffled under the roar in my ears. I pushed my chair back slightly, the sound of wood scraping against hardwood cutting into the chatter. All eyes turned. "Marla," I said, steady and clear, my voice carrying more weight than I expected. "You can take credit for your victories, but don't erase me from my own blood." The room froze. A ripple of whispers spread like cracks in ice. Guests glanced at each other, their eyes darting between father and daughter. Some looked uncomfortable, others hungry for the spectacle. Marla's expression didn't flinch. Instead, her lips curled into a smile as thin as glass. "Dad," she said sweetly, voice dripping with venom. "No one is erasing you. But maybe it's time you let go of the past. People move on." The words pierced deeper than any blade. I saw heads nodding in her direction, not daring to oppose her confidence. A few guests avoided my eyes altogether, unwilling to take a side. For a moment, the weight of isolation pressed hard, but deep inside, something refused to break. She can try to bury me, I thought, but I will not go quietly. Her smile lingered, her gaze daring me to push further, and in that silent battle, I realized the truth. She wouldn't stop until I was reduced to a ghost in my own family. Verna's voice rose above the low hum of conversation. steady and sharp as a knife drawn from its sheath. "Marla," she said, the tone clipped with years of authority, "you forget yourself. A family isn't built on image or titles. Respect is not optional, it is owed." The chatter around the room faded like air leaving a balloon. All eyes turned, and for the first time that night, someone other than me dared to hold Marla accountable. Gratitude flickered in my chest. Verna had always been blunt, sometimes uncomfortably so, but now her words fell like a lifeline. I sat straighter, watching Marla's smile tighten around her teeth. She didn't like being corrected, not in front of her audience. That much was clear. Marla's reply came quick, sharp, meant to deflate the sting. "Verna, with respect, times have changed. Your way of thinking belongs to another era." She laughed lightly, and a few guests followed suit, unsure whether to nod in agreement or shrink from the tension. "We can't cling to old notions of duty. Progress demands adaptation." Her words were polished, practiced, yet her eyes betrayed her, hard, cold, darting briefly toward me as if daring me to align myself with Verna's defense. I didn't. Not yet. The room shifted again, conversation forced back into safer channels of business talk and shallow laughter, but beneath it all was a pulse, quick and uneven, like a heartbeat under strain. Something was cracking, though most couldn't name it. I could feel it, though. As sure as the ache in my bones. As I adjusted in my seat, my gaze caught something at Marla's side. Her handbag, propped open carelessly near the fireplace. A stack of papers lay just inside, and one sheet had slid out far enough to catch the light. My name, my signature. The sight jolted me like a splash of ice water. Leaning closer, I made out the curves of my handwriting, but too neat, too recent. It wasn't mine. Someone had copied it. The conversations faded to a dull roar in my ears. My daughter's ambition had already taken my place at the table, my credit for years of sacrifice, even my face from family photos. Now, it seemed, she wanted to take my very name. I drew in a slow breath, forcing my expression into calm, a slip of the mask, a single twitch of shock, and she'd know I'd seen. I folded my hands in my lap and let the paper fall back into the shadows of her bag. The urge to stand, to call her out in front of everyone, burned hot in my chest. But a quieter voice held me steady. Not now, not like this. To expose her without proof would hand her the advantage. No, better to wait. To gather what I needed, and strike only when the ground was solid beneath me. So I stayed seated, nodding faintly as Clint raised his glass in another hollow toast. Around me, the laughter rolled on, but Marla's eyes flicked toward me now and again, wary. She must have sensed the shift, the faint ripple in the air that said I was no longer only enduring, I was planning. Inside, a calm fire spread. Let her think she'd silenced me. Let her think she'd erased me. Tonight had only revealed the edges of her scheme, and I was far from finished. I sat with my back straight, lips pressed into something like a smile, and let the weight of the moment settle. Her guests didn't know, Verna didn't know, even Marla didn't fully know, but I did, and that knowledge was mine to wield. I saw my name twisted on paper, my life rewritten without me, and I knew Marla wasn't done yet. Clint Malloy lifted his glass high, his grin wide, his voice carrying across the room. "Here's to Christmas, and to the forgotten man of the evening." The laughter that followed rolled around me like cold wind off the harbor. Some guests chuckled politely, some a bit too heartily, and every sound carved deeper into the hollow of my chest. The sting was sharp, but it didn't bend me. My back stayed straight, my chin steady. On the surface, I looked calm, but inside the words settled like stones. Forgotten man, that was the legacy Marla wanted me to wear. I caught her smirk in the glow of the Christmas lights. She seized the moment, her voice sliding in with ease. "Well," she said, her tone light but heavy with poison, "perhaps it's time Dad let the younger generation handle things. He's earned his rest." Her words, framed as respect, landed like a dismissal. A few guests nodded, not out of malice, but out of the social ease that comes with agreeing. The fire in my chest burned hotter. Clint thought he was clever, But I knew his toast hadn't been born of his own wit. It had Marla's fingerprints all over it. She had planted the seed, letting him deliver the sting with a fool's grin. He was her blunt instrument, and she knew I wouldn't publicly strike at him without striking at her. I forced a small smile, but my mind raced. If she was bold enough to belittle me in front of everyone, what else had she prepared? Later, as the room shifted toward the buffet and conversation scattered, I caught the hushed voices of Marla and one of her associates, a man in a sleek suit who looked more lawyer than guest. I didn't mean to overhear, but the words reached me clear enough. It's already signed. He won't contest. My breath caught. Signed? By me? The memory of those forged documents by her bag earlier flashed across my mind. This was no longer suspicion, it was confirmation. My name was being used, my life rewritten, while I stood alive and breathing in the same house. The fury surged, red-hot and dangerous, but I swallowed it whole, letting it settle like iron in my gut. Not yet. Timing mattered. A storm unleashed too soon would scatter, but one held back could break the dam at once. I chose silence, a silence that wasn't surrender, but strategy. My composure seemed to unsettle her more than any outburst could. She looked at me from across the room, eyes narrowing as though she knew I wasn't as cornered as she wanted. The air thickened as Clint rambled through another clumsy joke, but I barely heard him. My mind was a steady drumbeat. Gather proof. Wait, and strike when the weight of truth would crush her schemes. And then, in the midst of the chatter, a hand brushed mine. A guest I didn't recognize slipped a folded napkin into my palm. No eye contact, just a quiet whisper. Be careful, she's setting you up. I slid the napkin into my pocket without breaking stride. My eyes lifted, meeting Marla's across the room. She was laughing, charming her audience, but my heart pounded with a different rhythm now. I wasn't alone. The betrayal I had felt all evening no longer seemed like a figment of bitterness. It was real, documented, whispered, and unfolding around me. And now, with that warning in my pocket, I knew I stood inside the web itself. A stranger's warning in my hand told me the truth. I was no longer imagining Marla's betrayal. I was standing in the middle of it. The clinking of glasses should have carried cheer, but instead it rang like a warning bell. Family and guests gathered in the main hall, the air thick with murmurs that slipped between the clatter of cutlery and the faint hum of carols in the background. Marla positioned herself in the center, her red dress shimmering under the lights, her voice poised and clear. She smiled the kind of smile that was meant to convince everyone she was in control. From where I stood near the edge of the room, I felt the tension press down on my chest, heavier than any winter coat. Her eyes swept over the crowd, resting on me for just a second, cold and sharp, before she began her performance. She raised her glass higher than the rest and said, "Tonight is not just about family. It's about legacy." Heads nodded politely, and I could almost hear the rehearsed rhythm of her speech. I tightened my grip around the stem of my glass, my resolve hardening. The whispers, the documents I'd glimpsed, the way she had pushed me to the edges of this evening, it all pointed here, to this moment. Then she struck, with a practiced gesture. Marla produced a folder and spread it across the coffee table for all to see. Crisp pages slid into view, each marked with my name, my signature, or at least, something that looked like it. Her tone was smooth, confident, even tender to those who didn't know better. "My father wanted this," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "He insisted it was time to let the younger generation lead. These papers are proof of his trust in me." Gasps rippled through the guests. Some leaned forward to peer at the documents. Others turned toward me, their faces a mix of surprise and pity. My name, forged and twisted, stared back at me from the pages. I felt fury rise like fire in my chest, but I forced myself to stand calm, unmoving, as though the heat belonged to someone else. This was her peak, her trap designed to strip me bare in front of everyone. I waited for silence, then slipped my hand into my coat pocket. When it emerged, it carried no folder, no pile of papers, only a few documents neatly folded, ready for this exact moment. With measured steps, I approached the table. "If you're going to accuse me," I said evenly, "let's do it properly." I laid down bank records, correspondence, and contracts I had safeguarded. Calmly, I pointed to dates that didn't match, handwriting that shifted from line to line, and a financial discrepancy that exposed the lie. If these were truly mine, Marla, explain why the account numbers don't exist. Or why you forgot that I never signed anything on Sundays. The murmurs rose louder now, but they weren't against me. Faces that had leaned toward her now leaned away. Doubt seeped into the room like a draft through an open door. Marla's smile faltered, the edges of her confidence unraveling. Before she could snatch back the narrative, Verna Crowell stepped forward. Her voice, sharp and unyielding, cut through the noise. I remember when those ornaments were bought. I remember who paid for the renovations. And I know exactly what Lester did for this family. Don't you dare rewrite history. Marla. Her words landed with weight, anchoring the room against Marla's storm. Guests exchanged looks, nodding in quiet agreement. Marla's mask cracked further, her voice pitched higher. Her hands gripped the papers tighter. The daughter who had basked in poise now looked cornered, her control slipping with each breath. And then came the blow no one expected. Dorian Hale, tall and composed, rose from his seat. The CEO's presence drew instant silence. He didn't need to raise his voice. His words carried authority born of respect. He looked directly at me, then around the room and said, "This man, Lester Vaughn, is no fool to be erased. I've known him for years, and to me, he has always been boss." The room froze. Glasses hung mid-air, whispers caught in throats. Marla's jaw fell open, her face draining of color as though someone had ripped the ground from under her. Every eye swung back to me, and for the first time that night, the silence felt like vindication. When Dorian Hale called me boss, the room went silent. Marla's face drained of color, and I knew her game was over. The room still trembled from the weight of Dorian Hale's words. His voice lingered in the air like a verdict, and for the first time all evening, Marla's confident mask cracked. She tried to rearrange her features into composure, but the flicker of fear in her eyes betrayed her. Guests whispered. The clinking of glasses stilled, and I stood rooted, absorbing the sudden shift. For hours I had been invisible, erased, humiliated, but now every gaze was on me, and not with pity, but with questions. Marla cleared her throat, stepping forward into the silence. "Let's not get carried away," she said, her tone thin and sharp. "My father has always had a tendency to exaggerate. You all know that." Her attempt at control sounded desperate. The words slid through the crowd, but they no longer landed as easily as before. I saw doubt brewing in their faces, the same doubt she once directed at me. A cousin muttered near the back, "Funny. I never heard him exaggerate about paying for your education, Marla." Heads turned sharply. Another voice chimed in. "She takes credit for what she never built." The accusations rolled through the room like small cracks in a frozen pond, spreading, splitting, and then came the defense, just as vicious. A relative from Marla's side stood tall. "He's clinging to control. It's time to let go. This is Marla's house. Her life." Others nodded, trying to steady the ground beneath her. But the split was clear now, the family dividing in front of me, in front of everyone. I felt no triumph, only the raw ache of what Christmas had become, a battlefield. Through the swirl of voices, a younger one rose, cutting through like a bell. "Enough!" It was Micah, my grandchild, standing in the center of the room with cheeks flushed and eyes blazing. All heads turned. Micah's voice shook, but only from the weight of truth carried in it. "I know who's been there for me. It's him, my granddad. He worked every day of his life to make sure we had more than he ever did." The words struck me harder than any insult Marla had thrown. My throat tightened, pride mingling with sorrow. For once, someone had spoken for me. Micah's gaze swept across the guests, daring them to deny it. "You don't erase a man like that," Micah said. "Not from our family, not from our lives." Marla's face turned to stone. "Stop this nonsense," she snapped, her voice harsh enough to rattle the room. "You're too young to understand what he's done. He's unfit, old, confused, senile." The words dropped like knives, slicing deeper than I expected. A hush spread over the crowd, the insult too cruel, too exposed. I steadied myself, letting her words hang. They burned, but anger wasn't my answer. I lifted my chin, meeting her eyes with calm that made her falter. My silence told the truth better than any defense. She had gone too far, and the cruelty was hers alone. Verna Crowell rose suddenly from her seat. She didn't raise her voice, but her tone carried a blade of certainty. "That's enough, Marla. We all know what you've done." Her hand trembled slightly, but her eyes were fierce. "I have proof. Documents you tampered with, records you forged. I warned you once to stop. You didn't listen." Gasps burst from the room like sparks. All eyes whipped to Marla, whose face drained of color. For the first time all evening, she looked cornered, trapped. I stood in the middle of it all, feeling the tide finally turn. My fight wasn't finished, not yet, but as Verna's words cut through the air, I knew Marla's downfall had already begun. Verna's voice rang sharp and clear, slicing through the hum of whispers that had filled the room. She held a folder tightly in her hand, the edges trembling not from fear, but from the weight of what she was about to reveal. With deliberate calm, she opened it and spread out a series of documents across the dining table. "These," she announced, "are altered papers, financial and legal. They bear Lester's name, but not his hand. The signatures are forged, the intentions twisted." The room seemed to inhale as one, every guest leaning forward to see. I stood rooted to the floor, my pulse steady despite the storm breaking around me. For weeks, perhaps months, I had suspected Marla was moving against me. Tonight, the veil finally fell. Marla stepped forward quickly, her heel catching against the rug in her haste. "That's a lie," she snapped, but her voice cracked on the last word. "These are private documents. You had no right." "No right?" Verna shot back, eyes blazing. "And you had no right to falsify your own father's name." The shock swept over the crowd like a sudden gust of cold air. I could hear the shuffle of shoes on hardwood, the clinking of glasses hastily set down. The weight of proof, undeniable, had filled the room. I turned toward my daughter, holding her with a steady gaze. "Marla," I said, my voice firm but not raised. "Do you deny what's sitting in front of us?" She whirled on me, eyes wild. "Of course I deny it." She jabbed a finger toward my grandchild, her words spitting venom. "All of you want to paint me as some villain so you can keep me out. Well, I won't let you." The guests shifted uneasily. Clint Malloy, who had been so full of charm earlier, now looked down at his drink, his confidence draining with each passing second. A few guests whispered to each other, their eyes darting between Marla and the pile of damning papers. Her mask was slipping, piece by piece, but still she tried to claw it back. "This is a setup," she cried. "A coordinated attack to humiliate me in my own home." That was when Dorian Hale, who had been silent all evening, finally moved. He took the folder from Verna's hands, his presence commanding the room without a word. Methodically, he flipped through the documents, his practiced eyes catching every inconsistency. "These signatures are forged," he said evenly, closing the folder with authority. "The formatting is sloppy, and the notarization dates don't align. Anyone with a trained eye can see it. Verna is correct." His calm tone carried more weight than any shout could. The chatter died instantly. In that silence, the tide turned. Relatives who had hesitated before now looked at me with shame softening their expressions. The doubt in their eyes gave way to something else, recognition, perhaps even remorse. Marla's isolation was complete. She stood alone in the center of her glittering house, the lights overhead casting long shadows that seemed to swallow her whole. One by one, voices rose, not in her defense, but in mine. "I shouldn't have doubted you, Lester," one cousin murmured, his voice heavy with regret. Another guest, eyes locked on Marla, asked sharply, "Why would you do this? To your own father?" Each word landed like a stone against her fragile facade. I felt a small hand slip into mine. "Micah, My grandchild's grip was firm, anchoring me in the middle of the storm. I looked down, met their quiet gaze, and felt a swell of gratitude. In that small gesture, strength passed between us. For a moment, relief washed over me. I could breathe again, shoulders loosening as the truth spread its wings across the room. Yet even in that relief, grief lingered. How had we come to this? Christmas Eve, meant to bind us closer, had been twisted into a battlefield. Then Marla straightened, her eyes, wild only moments before, narrowed into slits. The corners of her lips curled upward into a smirk that chilled me deeper than her rage ever could. "You think this ends here?" she hissed, her voice low but carrying across the stunned silence. "You don't know the half of it." Her words dripped poison, wrapping around the room like smoke. I felt the shift immediately, the flicker of dread, the reminder that this was not finished. She still had something left, something hidden in the shadows, her gaze locked with mine, daring me, warning me, and in that moment, I understood. Even stripped of her power, Marla would not go quietly. Her words were poison, a reminder that even when stripped of power, she still held shadows I hadn't yet seen. The air in the room was thick enough to choke on after Marla's threat. Every pair of eyes bounced between her and me, as if waiting for one of us to strike. My chest rose slowly. Each breath weighted with the knowledge that she wasn't bluffing. For decades I'd watched her ambition grow, fed it in ways I shouldn't have. And now I wondered what venom she had saved for this exact moment. Guests whispered nervously, their voices skimming like restless insects over still water. Micah leaned closer, their hand brushing mine. "Don't let her scare you," they whispered, voice trembling but steady enough to warm the ice that had formed inside me. The words didn't erase the unease, but they reminded me I wasn't entirely alone. Still, silence pressed heavy, broken only by the creak of the old house as if it too sensed the storm building. I straightened my shoulders, not giving Marla the satisfaction of seeing me shrink under her gaze. Just then, the front door opened, letting in a rush of cold night air. Heads turned. Standing in the doorway was Otis Blanchard, his tall frame a silhouette against the glow of the streetlights. His voice carried across the stunned room. "Sorry I'm late. Took me longer than I thought to find what Lester asked me to keep safe all those years ago." In his weathered hands rested a small wooden box. The crowd shifted, curiosity prickling through their unease. My heart stumbled in my chest. That box, I hadn't seen it in decades. Back then, I'd asked Otis to hold on to sealed letters and a will addendum, a precaution I'd made when doubts about Marla's trustworthiness first began to nag. I never told her. I never told anyone but Otis. And now, on this night, he had brought it back. Marla's laugh cut through the moment, sharp and forced. "Otis, really? You drag in an old relic to wave some dusty papers around like they mean something? He's irrelevant." Her voice trembled despite her bravado, the first real crack in her armor. She tightened her jaw, and then, in desperation, spat out the words she'd been holding back. "You think you've cornered me, but I have my own evidence, and it will end him once and for all." Gasps fluttered through the room. A heavy chill rolled down my spine. She had prepared for this. Every muscle in my body braced. Though I didn't move, let her play her game. I forced my voice steady. "Then show it. If you're so sure of your proof, don't hide in shadows. Put it before everyone." Her eyes flashed, lips curling into a grin sharp enough to draw blood. From her purse, she pulled a small flash drive, holding it aloft like a dagger. "Gladly." The room stiffened, every face taut with anticipation. Dorian Hale stepped forward, his commanding presence instantly calming the chaos. "Then we'll see it properly," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. A projector was fetched. Cables connected. My heart hammered as the screen at the far wall flickered to life. Marla's hands shook slightly as she passed the drive forward. But her grin held. The lights dimmed. The room bathed in shadows broken only by the glow of the screen. When the first document appeared, the sound of gasps filled the air like a breaking dam. The words stared back at me, twisted, accusing, damning. My throat tightened, my body rooted to the floor. I had known she was dangerous, but I hadn't expected this. She hadn't just played dirty, she had saved her deadliest card for last. The documents glowed on the screen like a wound cut open in front of everyone. Line after line painted me as a man who had twisted accounts, hidden assets, and manipulated the family's future for my own gain. Gasps filled the room, the kind of sound that carries both shock and a hint of belief. My chest tightened, but I did not flinch. A man who has walked this earth for nearly 8 decades learns not to collapse at the first blow. "Look closely," I said, my voice steady though my throat felt raw. "Do not take anything at face value, especially when it comes from someone who's built her power on deception." The murmurs grew louder, some eyes darting between me and Marla, others whispering to each other with unease. Clint shifted uncomfortably, as if unsure which side of history he wanted to stand on. For a moment, I could feel doubts circling me like vultures. Fear was real, sharp as glass, but so was resolve. Otis stepped forward, holding the small box he had guarded all evening. "It's time," he said, his voice firm. He placed the box on the table and opened it slowly, revealing envelopes sealed years ago, along with notarized papers stamped by courts and lawyers who could not be bought. "Stop the projection," Dorian commanded, his voice echoing through the hall. The images on the wall flickered, then vanished into darkness. All eyes turned to the documents Otis laid out carefully. Inside were bank records, letters, and audio recordings that left no room for interpretation. Each one exposed the very tricks Marla had tried to bury, transactions traced back to her accounts, signatures she had forged, and dates that proved her entire story a fabrication. A heavy silence fell, the silence of truth. I did not raise my voice. I didn't need to. "This is who has been calling me senile. This is who has been telling you I am unfit." I gestured gently toward Marla, who now sat stiff, her jaw clenched, eyes darting like a trapped animal. The ripple started with Verna. She stood, her voice sharp and clear. "Enough. We have all seen the truth tonight. Greed has no place in this family, not on Christmas Eve, and not ever." Micah's young voice trembled, but it carried through the room like a hymn. "Grandpa, I believe you. I always have. Thank you for never giving up on us, even when others tried to erase you." Their hands slipped into mine, warm and sure. My heart clenched, not in pain, but in gratitude. Clint muttered something that sounded almost like an apology. Others followed, some quietly ashamed for ever doubting me, others openly condemning Marla. One by one, the tide turned until she stood alone in the wreckage of her own lies. Marla shot to her feet, her face twisted with fury. "All of you are blind." Her voice cracked, desperation spilling out like a broken dam. "You're nothing without me." "No," Dorian cut in smoothly. "You're nothing without integrity, and you've lost that tonight." His tone carried a finality that silenced even her. He looked at her with the quiet authority of a man who had already decided her fate. "If you continue, legal consequences will follow." She froze, trembling, then stormed toward the door. The slam echoed down the hall like a coffin lid closing. The room stayed quiet for a long breath. Eyes turned back to me, waiting, some for anger, some for triumph, some for wisdom. I chose dignity. "This was never about money," I said slowly, my voice filling the hall. "It was about respect. Respect for those who came before you. Respect for the sacrifices that built the very ground you stand on." I let my gaze sweep over the room, resting on each face that had wavered, doubted, or whispered against me. Family is not built on greed. It is built on loyalty, truth, and love. Without those things, you have nothing more than strangers under the same roof. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Guests bowed their heads, some ashamed, some thoughtful. Slowly, they began to leave, each one quieter than when they had arrived. By the time the door closed behind the last guest, only Otis, Verna, Micah, and I remained. I exhaled deeply. A weight finally lifted. "It's over," I whispered. Though in truth, it wasn't just about Marla's downfall. It was about proving that a man's worth is not a race simply because others find him inconvenient. That night, I didn't just defend my name. I defended the dignity of every elder who has ever been cast aside by their own blood, because age is not weakness, and dignity is not negotiable. When the young forget their roots, it falls to us, the old, the stubborn, the survivors, to remind them that truth will always outlive ambition. Family without respect is no family at all.